All right, Chapter 6 exam, your last exam. It's not a comprehensive exam, so nothing in here about categorical logic, no Venn diagrams. You don't have to sweat any of that. This focuses exclusively on Chapter 6, propositional logic, and it's going to have problems that ask you to translate ordinary language statements and arguments into symbolic form, which is always really the hardest part, and then to use ordinary and indirect truth tables to test arguments for validity, statements for consistency, and then there'll be a couple of problems that ask you to identify the form of an argument. As always, you have 2 attempts and unlimited time at the same problems in the same order. Whatever strategy you've been using to complete your previous exams successfully, keep using those strategies for this one because they're serving you well. I'll talk to you a little bit here about what some of those strategies should be. And if you actually watch this, you might even get a couple of exam answers provided for you. Okay, so there's your enticement. You want to make sure that you complete this exam before the last day of the semester, which is Friday of finals week. It's important to note that Canvas will automatically shut you out of all of your classes for anything but viewing stuff at the end of the day on that Friday of finals week. Okay, so you won't be able to submit any assignments or complete any exams or quizzes for any of your classes. So you want to make sure you get on this sooner rather than later. And you want to make sure that you look at the instructions for each question, of course, really carefully to make sure that you know exactly what it's asking you to do. Sometimes the instructions can be a little clunky, so you want to kind of, if the instructions are confusing, you'd want to email me if you can't figure it out on your own, or just kind of sit with it and try to figure out what the instructions are actually saying. So let's look at a couple of problems together. All right, so question number 1 says this: determine whether the following symbolized arguments are valid or invalid by identifying the form. In some cases, the argument must be rewritten using double negation or commutativity before it has a named form. Those arguments without a specific name are invalid. Okay, so that second sentence there is a little clunky and confusing. This, in some cases, the argument must be rewritten using double negation or commutativity before it has a named form. Okay, so this is what that means. It means, remember that in propositional logic, unlike categorical logic, the order of the premises doesn't matter. So when you're trying to figure out whether or not an argument form looks like the form that you see on your handout or in your book for modus ponens or modus tollens, you may have to do things to the argument like switch the order of the premises or change the way the negation is working in order to get it to look just like that form. But what I would encourage you to do is to look to see what's actually going on in the argument. What's it doing? And if you can figure that out, that might be the better way to come to the form. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about here. So here you have an argument. Tilde D horseshoe N is the first premise. D is the second premise, leading to the conclusion of tilde N. Now, I've got 5 options to choose from. My first step should always be to try to eliminate possible answers, okay? Because then I'm reducing down the possibilities and makes my job a little bit easier. So my first option here as an answer is modus ponens, the affirming mode. Now I know what a modus ponens look like. It looks like 2 sentences, one of which simply repeats the antecedent. Okay, so in this argument, tilde D is the antecedent of the horseshoe. In other words, it's the thing that comes on the left-hand side of the horseshoe. And then the second premise is actually negating tilde D. It's saying tilde D is not true, D is true. So that's not what modus ponens does. In a modus ponens, these 2 D's would have to look exactly the same for this to be modus ponens. They'd either have to both be tilde D or both be D, and they're not. So right away, I can eliminate that as a possible answer. Okay, so now I've reduced my list down to 4. My second possibility is a modus tollens. Now I know in a modus tollens, that's that denying mode. That's where one of the premises says, you know what? Whatever appears on the right-hand side of the horseshoe is not true. Something else is true. That's not true, what appears on the right-hand side of the horseshoe. But I look at this argument and I think to myself, well, hey, that doesn't that doesn't deny the consequent. That's not even the same letter. It's not N, it's D. So I know it's neither one of these first two answers. So that leaves me with just three answers left. Does it look like this is denying the antecedent? Well, here's the antecedent, D. Antecedent is the thing that comes on the left-hand side of the horseshoe. Does this second premise tell us that D isn't true, or tilde D isn't true? And the answer is, yeah, it does. Because the second premise here is saying, you know what? D is true. Therefore, tilde D has to be false. Are we allowed to deny the antecedent? No. So this is the answer we would select. It's denying the antecedent, and that's invalid. There's your first answer. You're going to get it right. It'd be hilarious if somebody doesn't at this point. Well, that'll tell me they're not watching the video. Okay, so let's look at the second question. Second question looks like one of these translation problems. I want to talk to you about some effective ways to go about answering these. All right, select the correct translation for each problem. And the rest of the directions here are not relevant. Okay, so here's the statement. Either Breitling has a diamond model and Ratto advertises a calendar watch, or, boy, I don't know how to say that, Tissot? I'm showing you how unsophisticated I am that I don't know what these fancy watches are. Tissot has luminous hands. Okay, so now you zero in on the statement, and we're gonna try to eliminate possible answers. So one way we might be able to do this is by looking really carefully to see if there's any kind of clues or signals about the kinds of operators that we know we're going to see in a translation of this. So I zero right in on this word either. That screams to me wedge. I also see this word and joining these two sentences here. What does that tell you? Dot, right? And then you see this word or, okay? And that screams, again, wedge. I know I always think of just there being a wedge right where that or is, okay? And that's actually important because what that tells me is that this sentence Tissot or Tissot has luminous hands is going to appear on the right-hand side of a wedge. So then I can come down here and look. Oh my gosh, look at this. The first two have T, Tissot has luminous hands, appearing on the right-hand side of a dot. We can eliminate these two answers right here. Okay, then what we can do is come back up here. Actually, look at this one. We can eliminate this guy right here because this is not a WOOF, not a well-formed formula. We have a dot and a wedge, and we know we're not allowed to have more than two operators like that without having parentheses. So right away, we've eliminated these first two answers and this one, and we've only got these two remaining as possibilities. And you have 2 attempts at this exam. You better get this right. All right, so then the question becomes this. Well, where do the parentheses go? What seems to be lumped together as a pair here? Is it B and R, or is it R wedge T? So when you come up here, there's a couple of things that should clue us into this. One is the position of the either, because that tells us I'm getting ready to give you an option that's going to appear on the left-hand side of a wedge. And that option involves 2 things. It involves Breitling having a diamond model and Ratto advertising a calendar watch. It's either the case that these 2 things are true or that this is, and there's only one option that does that, and it's right there. All right, so let's look at one more. I'm feeling particularly generous. Pretty soon, maybe we should just go through the whole thing together. All right, so I'm looking at this problem as number 14, and I wanted to look at this one because in either the video lecture for chapter 6.1, which I think that's the one I'm thinking of, or 6.2, I gave you something I told you at the time to take a note of, and that it had to do with S horseshoe N. And I was explaining in that video lecture that you could look for certain keywords that tell you the ordering of letters with regard to horseshoes. And so I told you, for example, if you see the word if, not if and only if, but just the word if, that should signal to you that whatever sentence follows if is going to go on the left-hand side of a horseshoe. And if you see the phrase only if, whatever follows that should go on the right-hand side of a horseshoe. And then I gave you a string or some examples of other words and phrases that can help you as well. Phrases like given that, provided that, is a sufficient condition for, is a necessary condition for. And that handout's going to be really helpful to you on this exam. So if you didn't take note of that, when you watched that video lecture, you might want to go back and do that. Again, I think it was 6.1 where I did that. All right, so if you look at this problem right here, it says Gucci features stainless steel. What's up with all the watch stuff here? Okay, Gucci features stainless steel. Also, Fossil is water resistant, given that Cartier offers a stopwatch. Okay, a couple of things to take note of. When you see this a semicolon, what that's doing is telling you I've got a couple of sentences here, okay? And I'm joining them together somehow. Conjunction, dot, okay? So there's going to be a dot here between these two sentences. Also, this phrase given that, if you look at your little handout, it says, look, whatever follows given that is going to go on the left-hand side of a horseshoe. So I know a couple of things that might help me come down here and start to eliminate options. So I'm going to look at my options, and I'm going to see if it's true that what appears after given that is on the left-hand side of the horseshoe, then I know C has to be on the left-hand side of a horseshoe. So I'm going to eliminate any option where C isn't on the left-hand side of a horseshoe. And I just eliminated that as an option. I'm also going to eliminate a sentence like this one because there's no wedge up here. I don't see anything that indicates anything like the word unless or either or. So now I've eliminated this option and I've eliminated this option. So I've got these three options to choose from. Now, the question is this. What this option says is that these two, if G and C are true, then F will be true. Is that what this is saying? This option right here says if C is true, Cartier offers a stopwatch, then Fossil is is water resistant, and Gucci features stainless steel. Is that what it's saying? In other words, if this C is true, that both of those other things are true? Or is it saying this? Gucci features stainless steel, and also, if Cartier offers a stopwatch, then Fossil is water resistant. Yes, there's your answer right there. So there's 3 freebies. You only got 31 other problems. Not even 31. It's probably more like 28 at this point to go. All right. So if you get stumped on any of these questions after your first attempt and you just can't figure out what to do, you know what to do. I'm not going to repeat it here. Shoot me an email. I repeated it. All right. Shoot me an email and we'll help you get worked through that problem. All right. So again, make sure you get this exam done before the end of the semester.